Welcome to the Bring Your Product Idea to Life podcast. This is the podcast for you if you're getting started selling products or if you'd like to create your own product to sell. I'm Vicky Weinberg, a product creation coach and Amazon expert. Every week, I share friendly, practical advice as well as inspirational stories from small businesses. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to Bring Your Product Idea to Life. So today on the podcast, I'm speaking to Natalya Koval. Natalya runs Ginger Quikki, and she helps founders and brands create leather goods, whether it's pet products, maternity, vegan, premium price point, handbags, inspired by mid-century design, folk patterns and colour. She's really passionate about incorporating traditional crafts into products. And I invited Natalya onto the podcast today to talk specifically about product design. So, of course, we talk a lot about the design that she does. So she works on a lot of handbags, for example, but a lot of what we talk about isn't just specific to bags or to leather goods. It's to just in your any kind of product design. So we talk about the importance of getting your design right, about balancing the sort of creative and the practical side of a product. We talk a lot about manufacturing and why it's important to identify a manufacturer and start working with them early in the process than you think. And we just basically cover all things product design. This is a really genuinely useful conversation. I learned such a lot from it, and I hope that you do too. And I would love now to introduce you to Natalya. So hi, Natalya. Thank you so much for being here.
Nice to meet you, and thank you very much for inviting for the podcast.
No problem. Can we start by you please give an introduction to yourself, your business, and what you do?
So I'm a handbag and accessories designer, and I have a Ginger Quikki Studio as a business. I help mostly founders and established brands when they want to bring a leather good type of product into the market. So that could be functional products like maternity bags or pet products, or vegan specifically bags, or whether they're looking for lifestyle bags which are inspired by traditional crafts. So taking very specific traditional craft that maybe is not utilized very well and working with social enterprise and NGOs to kind of make it into a commercial product. So that's kind of the spectrum of things I do.
Amazing, thank you. Let's talk through, if that's okay, sort of the process of how a product idea. So someone comes to you with an idea. We can talk quite broad and then go into more detail maybe about if someone has an idea for, let's say, a bag, how does that actually become a finished piece? What's the process that you would go through?
So usually I have like a questionnaire and we go through like everything. So it's the product and what is the customer and the bigger side of the what is it for? Because very often sometimes people have an idea, but I find that when they come, they haven't articulated what is this for and how much do they actually want to sell it for. And then there is sometimes very abstract concept. Well, I kind of like this and I like these things and I want it to be like this brand. But there's not like the niche is not developed and what is really unique. So we start like working with making it unique specifically for this brand and this concept and for this new business. And sometimes it goes into interesting directions where you start trying to find special things. Maybe it's something about somebody's life or what they want to bring into their like personality or their family history. And you start trying to take pieces from this, sometimes very abstract things, like maybe somebody has mixed cultural heritage. You start introducing those things in product. And then gradually that becomes a product that has a bit more meaning. Now that is when this is a lifestyle brand, where it's very functional. The process then just goes through functional and customer. But sometimes it's a blend, like, yeah, you just never know where it goes sometimes, which is what makes it a lot of fun. It's very kind of creative process and a journey with somebody's vision.
Yeah, that does sound really fun. And do you help people when they come and they've got an idea, if they come to you and it's just a concept, they say maybe they want to design a bag and it's got a link maybe to their cultural heritage or a certain type of craft, do you help them with designing what the finished piece will actually look like, how it's constructed? Do you get involved in those details as well?
Yeah, so start like with the abstract thing, and then it gets narrowed down to what's the look, and then goes through the design process, fleshing out the design on all functionalities, then making sure that this product is can be manufactured where they want. So it's like I usually try to get a pinpoint of what's people's like budget is in terms of the volume stuff and trying to pair then which production is gonna work with that. So, and it's kind of different for different projects because in different countries you have different capabilities. And if, let's say, somebody wants a premium product, so it's not a complete luxury, but it's not a complete high street, somewhere in the middle, and it's a new brand. And they want that element of heritage and storytelling. So then I try to shift them to look into production in Europe because they get that maxi element of it. Like it's a storytelling. And then design goes making sure that this works for this type of capabilities. Because of course, if you go to China, you can do absolutely everything. Everything is possible. But when you do small scale as a startup and you want to work with like premium price point, but you also want this heritage element of like Spain, for example, you have to work within that parameters. Not everything is possible unless you have unlimited budget. So it's trying to pinpoint all these things and work with like, if you want this is possible. And I think people sometimes get at this stage, in my experience, a little bit they don't realize how many things are not possible. Like it's like it's possible if you have a lot of money. And sometimes people think, well, I want this and this and this, and sometimes they don't realize that all of this accumulates in the budget. So creative process can very quickly expand in terms of the cost of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you help them actually find someone to manufacture their bags or their finished item as well? So do you help them right up until the point of finding someone that can do the manufacturing?
Yes. So if I know a factory that works with what they're looking for, then I help, like I introduce the factory or recommend them where they can be looking, depending on what it is. Yes.
Oh, that's really useful because I think finding a manufacturer must be really hard. I think it's great you have all of this experience to help people because, as you say, I think until you start that process, it's very hard to know whether everything you want is possible. And as you say, within your budget as well.
Yeah, it can be. I think that's what maybe in my experience people might find surprising is like design part of, because it's quite a creative process and people get excited. They like, you get to develop a product and then there is a story and then there is finding the identity of it. And it's incredibly creative, exciting, and a bit of a dream-like process. But very quickly, if it's not controlled, the budget can massively like fluctuate because you can go into different directions, like very specific hardware that can have a story, that can have a complex mechanism, and that can cost a lot. Or you go into very particular prints that you want to apply onto the product, or the type of embroidery, and then like it's little details that don't look that they don't look like they're gonna take you that long to develop, and they don't look like they're going to be that difficult. And so people sometimes initial impressions like, well, I want all these things because I think if I add all these things, it will definitely sell. But that's not usually the case. Sometimes it's the overall presentation and the brands and the design and the simplicity that will have more success than adding a lot of things. And it's when somebody starts doing his first time, I always start with that, but like it's going towards simplicity and constantly simplifying everything. But sometimes it takes a while to get to that place where less is a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So your process sounds really detailed, which is really good. Do you find, are there any stages that you think people, in your experience, tend to want to rush or maybe cut corners when it comes to designing a product? Because I guess there's a lot of excitement, isn't there, and just wanting to get it
Yeah.
out there. Do you see things where people would, rather skim over certain things?
Um, well, because there is like a cycle, so you start with the concept and the collection, and then the most interesting part, of course, is the design element, getting into all the designs. But the development and the sampling part is usually gets quite frustrating because not everything works first time or second time, and sometimes some things don't turn out how you envision. At that point, that process becomes quite frustrating, and then there is a production side where it all got finalized, and then you have to go into production. Sometimes there is a desire not to really pay too much attention to it because there's a lot of other things to do, and it's easy to kind of like just do this and this needs to be done. And that's the part where the focus and attention really needs to be the more, because the financial outcomes of those things going wrong are massive, like not notice something. And so that's what people try to skip things, like in my experience, as well as the quality control. Once they go into with the factory and they have to, like I always make sure that there is a quality control process that comes and inspects the order. And then the first sample, like the golden seal sample, is very close to the final production, because sometimes they're not. And it's a lot more common than people realize that there can be difference. So it's making sure that at this stage, everything is exactly as how you envision to be. But sometimes I find that that's the part that becomes not so, it's harder at this stage to make sure that all of this is how it should be. So there is a certain, sometimes a resistance, but this is where the focus needs to be the most. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, and I can definitely see that it would be very easy. It sounds like you're really thorough, and I think that's great because it sounds like it could be really easy to miss something. So maybe something isn't, when you get your prototype, something isn't quite as you'd envisaged, or maybe something doesn't work. It sounds like you have to pay real attention to detail to get this right.
Yeah, I mean, and thing is,
I
I
was,
think design is a very, oh, sorry.
no, 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 you go.
I think design is a very emotional process for when there is this process of collaboration, and there is a lot that for somebody who is creating and like on a journey with them, it's very emotional. Sometimes it's almost like part of somebody's identity that they're sharing and putting into this work. So when that identity is not showing up in the final product or in the samples, sometimes the reactions can be quite visceral and almost physically painful. Oh my God, like this is like can be emotionally quite volatile. And I think I always try to like really warn people that you are gonna feel this storm that is either amazing or it's absolutely awful. And there is nothing really in the middle. It's emotionally quite volatile. So just getting ready to that stage that it's probably going to be like this and that's okay. And eventually the product is going to look great. At least that's my
Yeah, that must be
experience.
really surprising for people. So
Yeah.
no, and I'm sure that's many others. But I think that's something that's really good for people to know, because I guess people could be taken by surprise by the strength of their reactions if they're not expecting that. But I suppose when you're designing a product, it's very personal to you, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's somebody is like stepping into that role of a designer. And um, there is another tension that often happens, usually towards the process of launch, where as a consultant, my job is to be the difficult person, is to be the person that's gonna point all the boring things, like maybe this is a threat, maybe this is a risk, and maybe this is not gonna work out how you intended, and maybe this is really not possible, however much you want it, if you really want to launch and not burn yourself. And um, nobody likes to hear that. you know, nobody likes to hear that their vision and their beautiful dream is getting killed in the process. But that's the only way you can kind of bring it to life. And I think it's good to kind of realize that if you want the project to launch and to have success, it's good to be open to the energy of a consultant who's gonna slightly put the rain a bit on the fireworks, because that's what in a long process will reduce the risk and will make sure that the product gets launched. There is no any kind of like financial disasters, or there are financial disasters, but they're minimized and they're forecasted. And it's getting ready to the fact that it's good to hear what you sometimes don't want to hear. Because think when people start like finding a business, it's easy to kind of want to have your echo chamber. Everybody says you what you want to hear, but that's the last thing you actually want. This is really bad for you. And I find that this is an important thing for success of the project.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually, and I think you're right. It's invaluable having somebody who knows they've been there, they've done it, they have the experience to know this will work, this might not work. Here's the risks. Because when you go into it for the first time yourself, you don't know any of this because you don't have all of that experience behind you. I would love to talk a little bit about the sort of the design process. What does good design mean to you beyond how something actually looks?
So let's say if that is a functional product, because they slightly differ. Um, if it's a highly functional product, then it's about the ease of use, and it's less and more. Sometimes, depending on what it is about reinventing the wheel for the specific purpose, and sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to make it more beautiful, and that's okay. And I think it's the simplicity, and the simplicity sometimes in the really boring things that, like, so for example, I have a product next to me now. If that's okay, I'll just use it as an example for this.
Yeah, please do.
So this is something I'm currently working on. And if you think about this is a fairly simple product, right? It's simple in a sense like what it is. It's just a bag. It's just like leather handles and a hide. But what can make something like this good is the right feel of things. And it's not just the right thickness, but it has to feel a certain way when you hold it, and the edge has to feel the right way. And that depends on the thickness of and the softness of the type of the leather that you select. And it's so like it's not actually even visible, but when you start sitting and putting the materials together, it's like, well, this one feels right, and this one feels a bit cheap, and it's so subtle, but it's the person who's gonna hold in it. They might not even realize why they like it or why they really don't like it, but they will notice it. And it's these little things that really make a massive difference. Or like the way something like this as drapes, like on a garment, she drapes it well and it glues good. Like if it doesn't drape well, it just kind of looks rubbish, but you don't. It's getting, or like the way the zip sounds right. Like it doesn't sound like too much. It's easy to open and it's not too hard to open. So very, very subtle things that on a already well established product, they're just gonna elevate it. And that's when the product is good, because sometimes the product is almost like, and that's what my experience is sometimes, is the client might go like, we've designed it, right? Well, I think I'm really good now. I'm going to go with the factory. I'm just going to go into development it's and production. But sometimes it's just the development part is just not done to the right level. And it's very, very subtle things. It's just maybe the flap just doesn't close quite right. Maybe there is this just the reinforcement a bit off. And it's getting that right, because then it's not just it looks visually good, but it feels good when somebody is wearing it. But there's also the other side of the coin is going it too much. And again, that's when it's great to have as a collaborative process with a consultant, because so again, give this as an example. So this is something like I'm working on. This is for me, and it's just me who's working on it. So like I go through the same process as a designer as my clients do. I obsess about the details to the point that like my husband is working with me on this. And my husband's like, you don't need to take this so seriously. You don't need to take this so seriously because it's not important. But I like as soon as you left alone with your own business and your own product, that's it. Like you just go into this rabbit hole. And so the like design consultation is gonna like constantly pull you out what is part important, what is part is not important, because the desire to obsess and make it absolutely perfect is real, because it's you want to make sure that it's 100% right, and it's just getting that balance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And thank you for sharing the example as well. So anyone who's listening could actually go and watch on YouTube, then you'd be able to see the bag Natalia was talking about. But I hope if you were just listening, you still got the point, which is that, there's so many small things that go into making a great product. And I would love to know, how do you balance creativity and like the beauty of, because you want the bags to look appealing because you want to buy them, with the practicality? 'Cause for example, I have a bag. that I love. It's like a silver bag. It's really beautiful. But there's a point when I zip it, there's a point in the zip where it freezes every time and you have to you know what I mean? I zip it to a point and then there's a little bit of friction. I have to pull a bit harder to get it actually closed. Every time I use it, it annoys me. And it's such a small example, but so how do you in your work reviews with your clients balance that something looking really nice, but also being practical and working for the customer?
Well, I mean, there is a book about this. I think it's called Emotional Design. Um, I don't remember on top of my head the writer, but it's about the fact that you have those two sectors of this. So you have a design that can be very difficult on one side, like Philip Stark designs sometimes for the kitchen. Sometimes they're like passionately difficult to use, but people are very emotionally invested into them. And so they kind of go on this journey despite the struggle. And another brand would be like Tesla that breaks down, but the emotional impact of the brand is very strong. So people are going to do anything in order to still go with it and accept it. And then there is other side where the emotional impact is not that hard. So you really wanted to make sure that it works because you just want it to be seamless into your life. And if it's not seamless into your life, then what's the point of it? It becomes annoying. It's just like which one of these sectors. So sometimes with the bags that I have clients who do like very kind of creative bags, you accept that this is going to be for somebody who might be not wearing it too much, too often. So it's okay to do something a little bit complicated and not very functional from perspective of daily use because they are buying it for the look and the essence and identity. But as soon as it goes into the daily life and a busy product, then these things that you mentioned are absolutely non-negotiable because they just damages your experience and it's no longer fun because you really want this product to be not visible. You just want it to work. And if it doesn't work, then it's just, you're not going to use it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot to think about, isn't there? I would love to know from your experience of your clients, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making when they're designing and developing a product?
So sometimes it's the stages thing. So it's doing something very difficult, and then pushing it through. So adding a lot of complexity at the design start that might not be necessary, but doing it simply because you want it this way and it's the highway or this way and just going with it. And so that mistake financially costs and tends to accelerate a lot late in the process. It just costs more. So this is one of the things that happens. Another thing that happens is very chaotic collaboration with the factory where there's far too many changes and far too many things and the documentation gets a bit chaotic and not working with the factory on their timeline and just saying, well, I want this later and then just pushing it and then introducing the thing of price complexity into this. So expecting the factory to do a lot and also not wanting a good price. So I think it's all about like the more streamlined the process from the design to the execution and the less chaotic components it goes, the faster there is a chance of success. And I think this is universal, whether this is, a handbag or whether this is a game design. It's all the same. The more controlled and structured it is, the safer it is. And so this is one of the most common mistakes I find that people do. Another thing is missing certain steps in this process. So trying to save money in the wrong places. That's very common, like saving money on the development, saving money, like not really going into too much development because you don't think it's important. And then the product comes out substandard at the production side. Saving money on the quality control because you don't want to spend on the quality control and then you have serious problems in the production. Not really finding the right factory that matches. Now, this is very common, and unfortunately, that's just a risk. So usually what I suggest and work with clients is at the start of the process, you go into multiple directions with factories, more than one, and you develop with several, and then you decide. So you always have a backup. You don't just have one factory or two. Ideally, you constantly have a backup of multiple production partners. So if one is busy, if one is out, if the circumstances changes, you have that system. And of course, that costs more, but that is your kind of system to make sure that whenever something is fluctuating, you have several partners. Then there are things that people don't sometimes think through is they might have already the product, they have a factory and everything. It's the logistics of how it's going to get to the final destination. Now that, and then there are duties and where it's going to be stored. So, and things like there's also the complexity of, if you want the complicated packaging for this product, you want the complicated other elements for this product, they all need to start at the different times because each of them has a separate process from sample to finish. And sometimes what is very common is, well, I have my bag and I have production. Oh, now I have to think about packaging. But no, the packaging had to start at some process at the same time as the bag. And it's an emotional thing because it seems, well, it's not important right now. Why do I need to think this is the most exciting part? And then also you have things like the marketing side. I find that people don't start the marketing side earlier enough, and the marketing happens to be somehow once there is a product and once you're selling it, and then somehow, oh no, I need to start looking at the ads and everything else. But it's like all of these things have to come together, and it's hard to keep them all together because there's so many processes together. So that's what often happens. And then another thing is the photography. I mean, it's very important to get photography right, and people sometimes try to save money on that as well because they spend their bulk on the production and everything else seems to be less important. But yeah, it's interesting how, in my experience, people underestimate the importance of all the other components apart from the product and the production, and place less focus on those in comparison to the production and the product.
That's really useful, thank you. And I can definitely see that there must be a tendency to think, okay, I'm just going to focus on the product and I'll figure all the other things out later. But it makes total sense to me what you're saying, that you need to be thinking about all these things together to have something that works and can be delivered on time and on your budget. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned then about working with manufacturers in development stage quite early on. Um, so I'd love to know, how important is it to think about the manufacturing early, and what can go wrong if you don't do that?
So let's say I'm just trying to think of different examples of the product. Let's say the product has a lot of different custom components, and if there are custom components like surface finishes on the product, embroideries, debosses, custom hardware, um, certain specific construction that maybe not every factory can do in the leather goods, you kind of have to then work within the parameters. Well, I think I would like to go in, say, in this country with this product or in this, like in Europe. And then you start thinking, well, I've got to source some of these things myself if I want, to start this process. Because what sometimes happens is people have a complex product, like different custom components, and they think, well, I just go to factory. I have a design consultant. We got our tech pack done. I'm just going to go to factory and can I please have this very interesting, unusual finish, and I have this interesting embroidery that I would like to embroider. And when they go with all of this complexity, and yet it's this new brand, so there is a very big risk for factory to spend a lot of time working with this type of project. The factory is going to try to go into minimal effort on a lot of these things, or they go into an effort, but they charge quite a lot of premium at all of this. And the client has quite a reduced amount of options of what they actually get, because in order, to get what you want, you have to start doing all of this. Either you do it by yourself or with the direction of a consultant, or you get the consultant to help you to start this sourcing of the components together with the factory. So when you get to the factory, you have developed all of these beautiful things exactly the way you want it, and then you go into factory produce them. And it's different because, for example, in China, you need to do it to a degree less, because it's, there's a lot more choice. But if you go somewhere like Europe or somewhere like UK or somewhere like US, you have to do all of this preparation process yourself first. And I'm talking, for example, if let's say this is just a leather bag, or this is a vegan leather bag, and all it is has fairly predictable components, fairly, an interesting, unusual shape, but that's about it. You don't need to go into this. You go directly to the type of factory that you think can make it happen for you. But if you have custom hardware and some sort of very interesting lining, or you've developed some sort of unusual mechanism, something, you do have to start the process of sampling those things separately before you go to factory. If you really want what you really want and you don't want to compromise on those things, because that's the kind of the balance here. Yeah, because there is another component here. So if the construction of the bag is very complex, and I'm talking about like some sort of unusual constructions that have a drape in them, and they're not standard bags, in that case, you have to find the right factory that is capable of creating this construction. So it's not just a factory, it's the type of pattern makers that can do it. And sometimes, depending on complexity, I recommend clients to introduce a pattern maker into this process. So we've done the design, we've done the tech pack, and then go to a pattern maker who's going to develop these patterns exactly how you want it. And then with that, afterwards, to go to factory. Because when you go to a pattern maker, he just makes the patterns. Because it's not part of the factory, there's a lot more collaboration. You can sit with just that person. Let's look at this and let's look at this. And let's try to make this happen beautiful, exactly how you want it. And then you go to a factory that's more standardized process and you carry on developing it. Now, this is not necessary for everything. This is only necessary for very unusual things. Like, let's say, I'm just putting, out in there. Let's say it's a bag that looks like a car. You have to sit and work it. The factory is going to look at you and think you're crazy. You're a startup with this. Like, what do you want us to do? Like, forget about it. With your minimums, like, we don't want to work with you. So if you want still to come to that factory that is very good with this crazy design, you bring them patterns, they love you because you've made their life happy, because they don't make money on the pattern making and the development. That's the cost for a lot of factories. So if you minimize that cost for them, they love you because they understand you're serious, you're going to work with them, you understand that process, and you respect it. So it's understanding where factories is making money, where they don't make money, and not stretch them in the places where they don't make any money, because nobody's going to be nice to you. It's going to take 3 times longer. It's going to be extremely difficult, and a lot of things can go wrong, and everybody's going to be pulling their hair up. So you don't want this process.
Yeah, and I guess like the manufacturer, I guess it's a relationship, isn't it? And you ideally want it to be a long-term relationship. So you need to have that understanding of each other and help each other as best you can.
Yeah, and I find that like that is it's very, very important to really respect the factory and the skill and the pattern makers and the craftsmen, because this is like, yes, there is a design component, and yes, there is design and everything was design, but every stage of this process is very creative, because once you bring the product to the pattern maker, they creatively interpret it in their way, and then they add that creativity. And so it's a lot of collaboration on a lot of different processes, where it's very important to respect and be open to that expertise and that input, because when the design is good, but you also have a great pattern maker, I mean, that's just a saving thing. Like, they're gonna make it beautiful how you want it. But if you don't have that good pattern maker in this process, they're gonna kill that design. And no matter what you do on the tech pack, you can get it killed later. It's just a matter of like where. And I think there is a certain like, this is what I find through with the leather goods, is people think that, look, I'm going to have this very detailed tech pack and then I'm going to be safe. But it's not just that makes the whole thing. It's making sure that the design and the materials and the pattern maker and the factory, they all understand what's the final outcome. Because if one side is working against the other side, it's not gonna lead to that, no matter how well you do everything at the design and the technical side. It's a lot of things together that have to work. And sometimes there is this thing which is fairly common, where if the factory's abilities and the way they make money is through simplification of things, and it's just fairly normal. The factory has to make money by reducing complexity and simplicity. So there is going to be always a friction between the design that's a bit complex and the factory that wants it to simplify. And it's about recognizing that yes, you can come up with something quite complex, but there is going to be friction, and it's okay just to negotiate that in that process, and not just like, oh no, I can't have it. Like, it's not possible. I think people sometimes are not prepared for how much friction and how much negotiation goes in the development process and production. And that's normal. That's just part of it. Like, there's nothing good or bad. It's not like somebody did the job badly or somebody is a bad person. It's just, it's, it's a collaboration.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I would love another question I have about the design is, for someone doing this the very first time in particular, how do they know when their product is ready? It's ready for manufacturing, because I think there must be a tendency to endlessly tweak your design and change things. How do you know when, okay, this is it, this is what we're going with?
Um, I think you can never like 100% no, because I mean, I had a situation where something has been developed more than 3 times. Like, the standard thing would be like you develop it from the design and then you go into production 3 times and then you produce. But sometimes that can carry on many, many, many more times, and it's never quite right. Um, it depends. I find that it's very important to introduce the customer into this process as early on as possible. And I know there is a tendency, no, but what if somebody steals my design? Like, what if I start showing this and it's not perfect, and then ours is perfect? And there is a tendency, like, what if competition is going to steal this design from me? But um, by introducing the customer and getting their reaction, you can see, is this really ready or is this not ready? Because it could be that there's certain elements of the design that you think are actually quite right, and that the design team and the development think this is all fine. But then when it comes to user testing, it's like, oh, actually, there's something else somebody didn't think about. It's because we all kind of end up in being a little bit in that bubble of like just looking at it from a certain angle. So yeah, the more there is a testing, the easier it is to see when the product is quite ready, and getting as much outside feedback as it's possible. So it's not just one person, but the more. So then it helps to kind of look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'd love to know, have you ever designed anything or been involved in a design for anything that for any reason didn't work commercially? And if so, what did you and the client learn from that?
Um, I think it's very common for things not to work out commercially, even inside like the company, and I think for a designer, it happens fairly often. You start with like collection, and then the collection gets killed, or half of the collection gets killed because the brand priorities change, or the product gets killed because the budget is cut, or the product gets killed because there's a priority for a different product. It's a lot more common, actually, than maybe that is visible, like, because not everybody shows their
Okay.
process of a lot of like graveyard of design ideas that never made it. um we're learning from it. Sometimes it's the most creative ideas that gets killed, so because they're the most risky, and some sort of very unusual constructions, slightly something a bit too innovative that takes a bit too long to develop. um it's less so the more conventional things that gets killed, and the most expensive things also get killed. So something that is going to be manufactured somewhere in a very nice factory, but it's going to cost an arm and a leg, has a beautiful story to it. Yeah, so it's just, but then um, it's just part of it. And I think, like, for me, I used to, as a designer, get a little bit emotionally attached to this because you build a vision, you build a dream, and then that dream gets killed, and you almost feel like a bit of a heartache. It's like, oh, I spent like 6 months working on this, or a year working on this, or 2 years working on this, and it's killed. It's like, well, what can you do? That's just life. So gradually, as a designer, and I think for clients, it's the same thing. You get attached to it, and then your other business partner says, no, we're not going to do it. Well, it's not always about what you want to do that's going to make the most impact for the business. And I think that's another thing with these ideas is sometimes there is a strong desire to develop a bag or a product that you personally want as a founder, but maybe that's not what is best for the business. And sometimes the thing that for the customers is a different thing, which might not be as exciting to develop. So it's about constantly thinking about what is this all for? It's for the customer. It's not for the personal satisfaction, but there is this strong pull to go towards personal satisfaction in the product and getting sidetracked. And I think it's incredibly common at any stage of the company to go in that direction. Like sometimes it's with a small business, sometimes it's a big business, and people get sidetracked like this all the time. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I think it's actually really reassuring and encouraging, I think, to hear that lots of designs frequently don't make it commercially. Because as you said, you never hear about that. You only hear about the successes. So I think it is reassuring to know that that is a common thing because I think it's something that isn't that much talked about. So that's really good to know. Um, and only got a handful more questions. One kind of tied to that is there anything else that sort of behind the scenes of product design that you think people would be surprised by or maybe wouldn't know about?
So the very common thing I think people think, because you see the stories on the surface, oh, somebody started the business and in 6 months' time you launch and blah blah blah. What is less visible thing is somebody started a business and they only launched it 3 years later. Somebody started a business and they only launched it like 2 years later or 4 years later. Like a much longer journey, and a journey that went from a very different product at the start to entirely different brand direction later on. And it's common to assume, oh, this person must be failing. They must be doing something. No, it's a journey. And sometimes there was a discovery in that process and that led to this. And it's inevitable and that's okay. And I find that sometimes when some of my clients get really hard on themselves, like, I don't know, this is one pattern and I've been like 3 years and I still have nothing to show for it. Yeah, but what can you do? Like there was these things that were changed and then, one factory pulled out, another factory pulled out. Now the political climate, let's don't underestimate the political climate, like of the tariffs and stuff gets put into this conversation. And, I've seen entire supply chain disrupted where people are like, well, I was going to develop here, but now we're going to develop here because of the tariffs. Or like with the COVID, there was the shipment things and all of these things entirely play into this picture, entirely beyond your control. So, I find that it's good the more control over everything is good. So producing closer to home, not too far away, always helps with this. Another thing that I think people probably I would find it surprising because is sometimes the design process doesn't start with something concrete. So sometimes the inspiration for something could be not, I don't know, I've seen this pendant, like, I have here, but it could be a poem. Like, I want to convey this feeling. I have this poem, I have this abstract idea of this cultural idea, this religious idea, this sense of how a woman is supposed to feel, and that is typed to a certain archetype of a woman or a man. Like, they're very ephemeral as a start. And sometimes you start with something that you literally can't even put on paper. You can look at it in Wikipedia, but it starts so abstract and then it becomes very real. And that's the process that I think is not always visible. And another thing that is the design part of the project is constant problem solving. So there's a far more problem solving in this than inspiration and just getting it happen. It's constant battling, like how do we fix this? How do we fix this supplier? How do we fix this? How do we find solution to this thing you never thought will be your problem ever? And you constantly rapid like, putting fires out. So that's the thing that maybe at the start people are not ready for. And also the thing is how much pain there is in this process that is going to be incredibly hard, and it's just going to get harder and harder and harder. And that's just part of it. Like, it's not going to be magic success and easy. It's always going to be hard. And I think sometimes people go from a corporate career to a founder career. It's that process not being ready for the fact that this is going to be incredibly emotionally challenging, and you need a lot of resilience. So if you're ready for it, it's kind of better, that it is going to be hard, then it's easier.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you so much for being so open about all of that, because I think it is good for people to know what it is they're entering into. I have one final question before we finish, if that's okay. And that is, if someone's listening and they've got a product idea, or maybe, as you said earlier, just a feeling or a sense of something they want to convey, but they've got no design background, what would be your best advice on how they might get started?
Well, you can they can go on this process partially like themselves into finalizing what they want, and it's all about really really getting to a stage of articulating it. So there is a strong desire for somebody, and I've seen this happen, is I have this kind of concepts and I have this kind of my own sketches. Let's just go to a factory and find a factory and make it happen. Now, in most cases, unless the factory is absolutely desperate, they're not really entertaining an idea like this because it's a headache. You have to go on a journey educating this person, and it's extremely cost inefficient for the factory. So it's about recognizing that you kind of have to go and develop this first before you go to the factory. And now you have the AI tools that you can do a lot of stuff with, like in terms of visualization and everything else. But the more there is of segmentation of what this is and fleshing it out of what it really is, and visually and in the other elements, then the better it is before you go to a process like with a design consultant. If the person is looking to do this in a more budget friendly way, but I would strongly advise against trying to go on this journey entirely by yourself with a factory, because it's just going to end up costing you way more later. It's people think I'll save money now and before I do it later. But the issue is, which again, I'm finding this very often. A lot of people now start their own business with the handbags. It's very common. So the factory is also aware that you are a new person starting your own business. And sometimes what happens, it's a little bit like a Wild West, is they're going to make a lot of money on you by putting you in direction where they want you to and overcharging you and everything else, because you're an easy target. You don't know what you're doing. And they're going to get that good business out of you first time, and then then you're probably not going to have a second one. So if you have a person like a consultant that takes you in this, they make sure that you're ready for all of this and you don't get caught into something that looks like you've just been slightly kind of screwed on by the factory. It's so common that the factory take advantage of people. Like like I myself as a consultant, like in this position sometimes, where you present information. Oh, yeah, we work for this brand, but where is evidence? Well, see these bags there, like, but do you work for this brand? Oh, but the bags are produced in another one. Like, no, we hear this is where you told this story, but where it's produced somewhere else, and you constantly like have to double check. Is this really a decent factory? Is this really good? Is this really what it is, or they're just trying to tell you this story because it looks really good for them that they work for this brand? It's so common that the factories present you this manufactured story in order to get people in because they don't get enough business. So it's just like production is very expensive, can go wrong, and very hard to afterwards get your money back if something goes wrong. So it's it's about just being very careful with this whole process and not romantic about it. It costs money a lot very quickly if not doing it with enough diligence.
That's so helpful. Thank you. I think thank you for everything you've shared in this episode, because I think it will give people maybe a bit more confidence and a bit more knowledge about what's involved. So you're not going into it completely blind, as you've said. So thank you for being so open about all of this. I will link to your website and everywhere else people can find you and connect with you in the show notes for the episode, so people can get in touch. And yeah, thank you so much. I've learned such a lot. Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode. Do remember that you can get the full back catalogue and lots of free resources on my website, vickyweinberg.com. Please do remember to rate and review this episode if you've enjoyed it, and also share it with a friend who you think might find it useful. Thank you again, and see you next week.